Chapter 4. It was almost 1 o'clock in the morning when I flew back into Zoe's room and closed the window gently behind me. I slipped back into the big squishy cloud bed and snugged down into Pink Rabbit. This time I had no trouble getting to sleep. I closed my eyes, and the next time I opened them, it was morning and sunlight was steaming through the window. "Wakey, wakey," said Zoe, who was already up and bouncing about her room with Coco the monkey. She was busy getting out of her doll's clothes and laying down onto the floor. "Which outfit do you want to wear, Coco?" she asked. "The stripy dress or baby grow?" Coco looked across the room and down onto the water bowl. She didn't not want to wear any clothes. It seemed to be a long time before Zoe's mom called us down to breakfast, and by the time we walked into the kitchen, my tummy was rubbing. "My parents like to have a lie in that weekend," explained Zoe. Breakfast at Zoe was very different to how we have to my house. We usually have toast and fairy flour nature yogurt and red juice for that. But in Joe's house, it is bacon, egg, mushrooms, tomatoes, sausages, and orange juice. "Yum," I said. As we ate, I stared at the cake sitting on the counter behind the table. When we had finished our breakfast and cleared away, I grabbed George's arm. "We really can't enter the cakes," I said. "It wouldn't be fair." "But," began Zoe, looking disappointed. "You would be cheating," I said. "It would be offering the one. Think about it." "I suppose," said Zoe. She looked down at her hands and twisted them about. "You wouldn't enter it," she said, "but can we make another one before you go home? Without magic." "Gosh," said Zoe's mom, when we asked her to help us out our cake, "you must have really enjoyed making the first one." "We did," I said, because it is completely true. For the next few hours, we started into the kitchen and used the rest of the ingredients inferred the day before, making another cake. It was much smaller and not nearly as impressive as the first one, but I felt much happier about entering into the competitions. "I'll bring it to the Monday," said Zoe as I picked up my things to go home. She helped me to squish the magic fairy cloud back into the tiny pouch. "I've had the best time," she said. "It's the best sleepover ever." I agree, giving her a big hug. "Thank you for having me." "Thank you for your magic, my monkey," said Zoe, stroking Coco, who was sitting on the shoulder. "I know I only asked you to magic her alive for our game, but can she stay alive for always?" "For always, I promise. I'll have to explain that to my parents." "Somehow," said Zoe, and we both giggled. Then I picked up my suitcase and we went downstairs. "Did you have a lovely time?" asked Mom as we walked home together. "The loveliest time," I said. And I told her all about the 2 cakes we had made. The next day at school, there was an excited chatter into the classroom. My friends had all brought their cakes and were lying down onto the big table at the back of the classroom. "Goodness me," Mrs. Cherry saying, I'm going to be the trouble choosing the winner. I scudding over to have a look at the cakes that had already been brought in. Sashi and Samantha has made one of the shape of the flower, with little butterflies pinned over it. It was very pretty. Dominic and Jasper had made the cake shaped like a robot, covering a gray icing with jello-y sweets for the bottom. It was the middle of the table stood Bruno and Oliver's dinosaur cake. I could tell they had more effort into theirs than anyone else. They had made sponges, stegosaurus, covered in green icing with tingling biscuits, sprinkles stuck in all the way along the back. They had modeled little trees and smaller dinosaurs out of icing and placed them around the stegosaurus to make the edible landscape. When I saw it, I felt more alive than ever that Zoe was bringing a new cake and not one full of magic. I wondered where she was. It was not like to be late for school. Sorry, Mrs. Cherry, came a voice from a doorway. Zoe came into the room carrying a huge cake. It was twirling magical cake with glittery icing and tiny pinwheel fireworks spinning and sparkling all over it. The cake with 5 tall layers, each one is a different flavor. I stared at her and at the cake. My mouth fell open in horror, and I grabbed Pink Rabbit's paws. Wow, said Mrs. Cherry, her eyes almost popping out of her head with amazement. She hurried over to help Zoe lift the cake onto the table. It stood there like a mountain, looping into the Bruno and Oliver's dinosaur cake. I'm sorry, whispered Zoe when she came to sit next to me. I just couldn't resist in the morning. I saw 2 cakes sitting on the side in the before side onto the counter, and this one just looked so much better. But I said, starting to feel cross and upset. Don't be cross, Zoe begged. She reached out into my hand under the desk, but I snatched it away. I felt like she had betrayed me. Isadora, Zoe whispered. Her voice sounded a little warbling. I'm sorry, I just... Quiet, please, said Mrs. Cherry, holding her hands up for silence into the classroom. It is time to taste test the cake. She went over into the table and cut small slices onto each of them. She said as she nibbled and then chewed. Lovely. Then she got our cakes. She took a tiny slice of each layers and tasting them all. Her eyes went big and round. My goodness, she said. These flavors are sensational. The sparkling are just popping my mouth. See? Whispered Zoe next to me, but she didn't sound so sure now. I declare Zoe and Isadora the winners, said Mrs. Cherry, taking an envelope from the pocket and holding it in the air. The tickets are yours. Zoe stood up and walked over to the table. I followed her, my cheeks bubbling into the flame. She took the tickets held into her hands. Your cake is a work of art, said Mrs. Cherry. It must have taken you all weekend. It did, said Zoe, but her voice sounded choked now. I looked across to where Bruno and Oliver was sitting. They were clapping along with the others, but I could see disappointment in their face. "Well done, both of you," said Mrs. Cherry, smiling. "Now, I think we'll all have a slice of cake." She began to cut the cake up into the little squares and put them onto the plates. As she did so, the class chattered. "You can go sit down now," Mrs. Cherry said to us. Zoe started to walk back towards her table, cutting the tickets into her hand. I followed her, still feeling angry and upset. I wondered if I should go back to tell Mrs. Cherry that we had cheated. But just as Zoe got back into her chair, she stopped and stood very still for a moment. Then she turned around and walked back into the table where Mrs. Cherry was cutting the cakes. I followed. "Mrs. Cherry," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." "Yes?" "Isadora and I don't deserve to win the tickets." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Cherry stopped cutting the petal of Sashi and Samanda's flower cake and looked up. "We, cheated," said Zoe in a small voice. "The cake wasn't our own work. We used Isadora's wand to make some of it." "Oh," said Mrs. Cherry, sounded disappointed. "I'm really sorry," said Zoe. "It was my fault. Isadora didn't want to enter the cake, but I brought it away." "I see," said Mrs. Cherry. "What a shame." She didn't seem cross, but she held her hand out into the tickets and Zoe gave them back. "I will have to judged again," she said. "I know," said Zoe, staring down into the floor. I saw little tears escape from her eyes. Now," said Mrs. Cherry, "we all do things we shouldn't sometimes, and you did the right thing. It's owning up." Zoe sniffed. "And winners or not, we could all enjoy some delicious cakes now." She gave her one plate to Zoe and one to me. We went back our desk and sat down. I reached out, squeezed Zoe's hand, and gave her a big, beaming smile. "Right," said Mrs. Cherry. "There's been a change of the plan, for reasons that I wouldn't discuss. Zoe and Isadora have been disqualified from the competitions. The new winners are Bruno and Oliver." "Yes!" shouted Bruno and Oliver, both leaping up from their chairs and dancing around the room. They looked so pleased and delighted that I felt grew more happiness warm into the body. "Woohoo!" shouted Oliver, waving the tickets into the air. "It's really the most fabulous dinosaur cake," said Mrs. Cherry. "The best I've ever seen." Zoe looked down at her hands, and I knew she was feeling a bit sad about not winning the tickets and getting to meet Weeping Miss Fluff. "I'll tell you what," I said. "Why don't you come round to my next weekend for a sleepover? You can bring Coco, and we make real magic fairy cake with my mom. Then I'll get my dad to take us into the prepared vampire midnight feast onto the roof of our house. And we can go into the fly among the stars." Zoe looked up, her eyes sparkling. "I would love it," she said, throwing her arms around my neck and giving me a squishy hug. "There's nothing I'd like more,"